Do we really need another Star Wars podcast? No, no, we don't. But I'm going to give you one anyway. Today, we're going to talk about why I want to put another Star Wars podcast out there in the galaxy, my musings on seeing episode 1 in the cinema again, and my history with the Star Wars fandom. Hello, my name is Naomi, and this is Loth-Cat Mewsings, where I share my musings on Star Wars and beyond. And welcome to episode 1. Sort of appropriate, being that we are in the 25th anniversary week for Phantom Menace. 25 years, that's crazy. I was a sophomore in high school when episode 1 came out. I remember begging my parents to let me go be a part of the overnight queues that had sprung up at some of the bigger cinemas just to buy tickets and then to be the first people to go see the movie. And I was denied because I was a 16-year-old girl, and I was denied a midnight showing because it was a school night. I did get to go on opening day, though. We went to see it at Century 22 in San Jose, California, which is one of only 2 cinemas that had the original release on May 25th, 1977. The other one was in San Francisco. And so my dad insisted that we go see first the special editions there in 1997 because he remembered seeing them there in 1977 and then 80 and 83, etc. And then we went and saw Phantom Menace there as well because it had sort of become like this pilgrimage place for the Bay Area Star Wars fans. And it was just amazing. Those experiences were sort of my first experiences with Star Wars fandom, first with the special editions, and then again with Phantom Menace. Being around other Star Wars fans, I was a teenage girl in the mid-90s, and before the special editions, Star Wars wasn't really cool. It wasn't in the mainstream again, like it was in the earlier 80s, and then after the special editions and the prequels, and so I didn't know many other Star Wars fans, and so suddenly being in this queue of people with all of these Star Wars fans, and there were lightsaber duels going on in the parking lot and cosplay and playing Star Wars trivia with people who could actually challenge you. I would play Star Wars trivia with my sister, and she would get so mad because I would always win. But yeah, that was my first Phantom Menace and the special editions, my first real fandom experiences, and yeah, it was life-changing, really. And I guess it's those kinds of experiences and other, midnight showings and fan events. I got to go to Celebration in London last year for the first time. Those kind of experiences, those shared moments of appreciation and love for something. I guess that's sort of why I want to do this podcast. I love talking about Star Wars. Star Wars has been a thing in my life for 30 years. So the majority of my life. And I don't get to talk about it as much as I would like to. My husband is a fan. My best friends are fans, obviously. And I have really good conversations with them, but just wanted a little something more, and to maybe build up a little community of fans of who enjoy the entire buffet of Star Wars. I like something about everything that's been released. Don't love everything. I'll say up front, I'm not a huge fan of the sequel films, but there are things about them that I love, and I appreciate that other people have found things that they love about them. And I think it's so important that we be able to listen to each other and talk to each other about what things speak to us and our own experience with the different things being released. That's one thing I loved about Celebration is sitting around with people and hearing their why they like these things and why they don't like things, and respecting each other and saying, hey, that's cool. And I think that's what fandom is like in real life, not on Twitter necessarily. but I wanted to try to build up a community of people who can appreciate Star Wars for what it is, whether they love the thing or not. A community that's inclusive, multi-generational, just a safe space to enjoy things. And there's lots of places like that online already, and I know that. And there's a lot of really great content creators out there. I just found, for me, being sort of neurospicy, that I find it a little bit difficult to break into some of those larger fandom spaces. I'm not one to elbow my way into the club, so to speak. That's one thing I did find at Celebration. So many people knew each other and had connections, and people were very kind, and I struck up really good conversations with people, but I'm not one to sort of elbow my way into the club and say, hey, let me in. And so I thought maybe trying to start my own thing, build up a community sort of from ground up, and see what happens. I mean, I don't know how I'll build a community sitting in my house in a room by myself talking about Star Wars, but we'll see what happens. And there's so much coming up to talk about, and I'm so excited about Accolade, about Skeleton Crew. I'll be talking hopefully later about Bad Batch and the animation, because I'm a huge fan of the animation series. And of course, hopefully, fingers crossed, new trilogies, or not trilogies, new movies down the line. I'm a little skeptical about the Grogu and Mandalorian movie, but that's just me. But I cannot wait. I really, really cannot wait for the Dawn of the Jedi movie, because that, to me, I'm super excited about that. So yeah, I mean, I hope that we can connect and talk about Star Wars, talk about what we love about it, what we maybe don't like about it, and listen to other people's perspectives. I'm hoping to get some of my friends or people that I meet along the way to come and join me, so you're not just sitting and listening to me ramble on. But today, that's what you're getting, me sitting here and rambling on about Star Wars. It's what I do best, and I'm really excited about what we're going to be able to do. And let's get into it. So to start with, I thought we could talk about the Phantom Menace. I know I spoke a little bit about seeing it in 1999, but this past May the 4th, just a few weeks ago, I went with my best friend to see the 25th anniversary release of the Phantom Menace in the cinema. And it was so much fun. I mean, anytime there's a chance to see a Star Wars film on the big screen, I try to take it, because there's nothing like it with the sound and the energy of other people and the big screen. But this time, we decided to go see Phantom Menace in 4DX. And if you don't know what 4DX is, I think it's called something else in the States. I'm in the UK. But 4DX is an immersive cinema experience. So the seats move and rumble. When people fall down or get kicked, you get kicked in the back by your seat. And there's wind, and there's water at one point. Like when Jar Jar jumps into the lake, you got splashed with water. They even had fog at different scenes throughout the cinema. I mean, it was just insane and wild and so much fun. I mean, I laughed so hard I was crying. At one point, I think during the pod racing scene, we had like popcorn flying everywhere because we were just getting jerked around by our seats, and it was so much fun. I don't think I'd want to see a movie I'd never seen before that way, but for something like Star Wars, amazing, so much fun. And it really gave a movie I've seen, I think this was the 15th time I've seen Phantom Menace in the cinema, because I think I saw it 13 times in 1999 when it came out. I just kept going over and over again. And then I saw it in 2012 when they had the 3D release of it. And so, this was like my 15th time seeing this movie in the cinema. But yeah, the 4DX, highly recommend. It was so much fun. And yeah, it gave a very fresh perspective to a movie I've seen a lot. Ironically, even though Phantom Menace is the Star Wars movie, well, probably the movie overall out of all movies that I've seen the most in the cinema. It's not been my favorite. I'm much more of an original trilogy girl. I have a grown appreciation of the prequels. And so it was really good sitting down and watching this film again. I can't remember, it's been at least 5 or 6 years since I sat down and really watched Phantom Menace. I think I've put it on here and there, had it on the background when doing other things, but it's been the first time in a long time that I sat down and really watched the movie while getting thrown around in my seat, but having my 100% concentration on the film. And yeah, I was pleasantly surprised. I guess in my mind I had it, I don't know. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I really, really enjoyed it. I had so much fun. I will say that it's one of those movies, the prequels in general, where I feel like the additional material, the animation, publishing, comics, etc., has really helped enhance the film for me personally. The groundwork of the film is there, but watching the film this time after having read Claudia Gray's Master and Apprentice about Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, and then watching the movie, watching the dynamic between them, the dynamic between Qui-Gon and the Council, Obi-Wan and the Council, all of that was so interesting. After watching the Dooku episodes of Tales of the Jedi that came out last year, that added another layer of things going on. Of course, the Padme books by E.K. Johnston, which brilliant, and watching the movies there, and the knowing sort of what's going on behind the scenes between Padme and her handmaidens and her staff. Yeah, that added another layer to everything again. And I think, yeah, I think the additional materials have done nothing but elevate the original trilogy, the prequels, everything. And I think that really speaks to the quality of the additional materials and the quality of the film itself. And by all means, it does not need those things to be a good movie. It stands on its own. It holds up so well 25 years later. I didn't feel any of the CGI stuck out as like, ooh, that was made 25 years ago. It was just very natural. I don't think they've done anything. I know Yoda's been touched up. Because, yeah. But other than that, I think the core of the movie is pretty much as it was in 1999. And that's pretty impressive. I mean, you think about what George Lucas was doing with Phantom Menace, not just telling the story, but pushing the technology, pushing filmmaking as a whole. I think a lot of people were disappointed by it in 1999, not because of the film itself, but because of what they built up in their minds. So many people had, especially the older fans, obviously, had played out this story in their minds over the years, come up with ideas, and what George Lucas gave them is not what they had in mind. Plus, with the advance in technology, how much digital technology was being used in Phantom Menace, it gave it a very different look, and something we as an audience weren't used to in 1999. And so it didn't have that same feel of nostalgia that I think a lot of people were expecting because it was so technologically different. But now, when we watch the prequels in 2024, we're used to CGI backgrounds, CGI characters, all of that. And so for us, it's not jarring, but I remember seeing it. I remember seeing it the first time, and it was just almost overwhelming because of how many different things, the way things were done. Yeah, so I think I think that's part of the conflict of Phantom Menace, that nostalgia versus technology. George Lucas always wanting to push cinema farther and farther and farther. And he did. He changed filmmaking in 1977. He changed it again in 1999. And I think people forget that. You look at Jar Jar. Jar Jar gets so much. He's the butt of a joke, or people just don't like him. But because of Jar Jar, we've got Gollum, and we've got all these different CGI characters that are fantastic because of the work George Lucas, ILM, and Ahmed Best put into Phantom Menace. And yeah, so it's fantastic to see it in the cinema again, and to experience that, and to know the legacy that it set up. And I think it's interesting sitting and watching it as a 41-year-old versus a 16-year-old. As a mom, I don't think I'd really sat down and watched this movie since I've become a mother. And the scenes with Shmi just destroyed me in this viewing. I just cried every single time. I think part of it too is young Anakin. I see so much of my youngling in Anakin. This bright and optimistic little kid who has a heart of gold, who wants to help everybody, and who honestly believes in their heart of hearts that they can do whatever they set their mind to. They don't have limitations on them, and that's so much like my kiddo. And she's also neurodiverse, and I found myself sort of thinking about how raising Anakin as a kid, there's a lot of similarities between the Anakin and Shmi and raising a neurodivergent child. I think you've got this kid who sees the world in a very different way, and is bright but sort of different, and doesn't quite fit in with what people expect. And it's difficult and beautiful all at the same time. And I imagine Shmi had those moments as a parent where people questioned her parenting, what she was allowing Anakin to do, or how he was behaving. And that's isolating. And plus she was a single mother. I'm not a single mother, so I can't speak into that. But all those things create this isolating experience. And I imagine that she had doubts about what kind of life she could really give Anakin as a slave, but also because he was a little bit different, and what would he be like as he grew up, and could she handle that? And then suddenly these strange people appear, and he suddenly has this opportunity to go live what appears to be an ideal life, and it's everything he's dreamed of, and this opportunity for him to become something, not in spite of who he is, but because of who he is, because of his differences, and how that pull as a mum of wanting to protect your child and keep them safe and keep them with you, but also letting them grow and letting them be who they're supposed to be, even if it hurts. And I just think it's so beautiful, those scenes with Shmi, especially the conversation she has with Anakin right before he leaves, that it's his choice, and to go and to not look back. And you can see the weight that is on her. And I just wept. I just absolutely wept. And especially knowing the end of the story, knowing where Anakin ends up, knowing where she ends up. I wondered if she regretted her decision. I'm sure she did. Although, thinking about it, from her perspective, it was a worthy sacrifice. When you think about it, because for Shmi, she lets him go, and I'm sure she missed him, and I'm sure it was horrible. But eventually she was freed. She marries Klieg Lars, lives a pretty good life with Klieg and Owen, and out in the moisture farm. I'm sure she might have heard whisperings about Anakin Skywalker because, he did so much in the Clone Wars. Even though they were out on Tatooine, it's possible that she heard about what he was doing, and knowing that he became a Jedi and that he was out there and he was helping the galaxy, or as they understood it. And then in her darkest moment, he came back, and even though he couldn't save her, she got to see him as the Jedi that she hoped and believed that he could become when she let him go. That's really quite beautiful, because for her, that's where the story ends. She doesn't know the rest of the story. For her, that's it. Her son became a Jedi. That's really quite beautiful. I like that a lot, actually. Um, and of course, there were so many other things pushing Anakin down that path. From the moment that Maul kills Qui-Gon, that was the path he was going on. If you haven't seen Dave Filoni talking about Duel of the Fates, it was in one of the round tables from the first they did after the first Mandalorian. I'll try to find a YouTube link, put it in the description below, because if you have not seen it, it is amazing. Talking about how Duel of the Fates is actually the duel of the fate of the galaxy and the fate of Anakin. Because if Qui-Gon had lived, of course, things would have been very different. But go check it out, because Dave Filoni says it 100 times better than I ever could, and it's worth seeing. I also have a personal little headcanon. I don't think this was in any material anywhere. If it was, please correct me. I like to know the facts. But that Palpatine was behind the Sand People, the Tusken Raiders, kidnapping and hurting Shmi. I know there was always tension between the moisture farmers and the Tusken Raiders, but the timing of everything's a little sus for me, and so I have a theory that he pushed that agenda, that he hired them to steal her, to kidnap her, to torture her, to help push Anakin further along the path toward the dark side so that he could keep his timeline of his Grandmaster scheme of a plan going forward. And yeah, that's my own little headcanon. I think Palpatine was pulling a lot more strings than we actually see. I don't think I would have picked up on these aspects or connected. I know I've never connected with Shmi Skywalker as deeply as I did as the last time I watched the movie this week, May the 4th. And yeah, I think that's good media, good films, good books, all of that. It grows and it changes with you. That you can watch it as a 16-year-old and be infatuated by Obi-Wan Kenobi. I mean, I'm still infatuated by Obi-Wan Kenobi, but there was a different focus, and now being able to watch it and pull out these things and connect it to your own life and your own things. Yeah, that's good media. That's good writing. That's why these stories stay up. And I mean, it's still an exciting movie to watch. Watching Duel of the Fates every single time, whether I'm watching it on my phone or on a big screen. Always top-notch Star Wars. One of my favorite scenes ever. I love the pod racing scene. I always found it a little bit long. This time it was fun because we were being thrown back and forth. And that I love this. One of my favorite endings of a Star Wars film is Episode 1 with Augie's Great Municipal Band. Oh my gosh. If you have never listened to David W. Collins' David W. Collins' The Soundtrack Show, it's a podcast where he breaks down soundtracks of different movies. Absolutely brilliant. I'll put a link in the description. But he did one breaking down Episode 1, and I can't believe I didn't pick this up until I heard this podcast. It's one of those things that once you hear it, you can never unhear it. But Augie's Great Municipal Band, that is Palpatine's theme from Return of the Jedi being sung by children and in a different key. And Oh my gosh, when I learned that, my brain just went because John Williams, man, John Williams is so brilliant. There he was answering the question, who is the Phantom Menace, musically in the resolution of this film. And just amazing. That's one of my favorite things. And I can't, yeah, once you hear it, you will never, ever unhear it. And it gives me chills every single time. Every time. And I think the episode 1 soundtrack is one of the best movie soundtracks of all time. Anakin's theme, Duel of the Fates. Although, how many people were spoiled by that CD? How many people? Because I was. My dad was so excited. He brought me home the soundtrack. It came out like a day or two before the movie. And I was not going to listen to it. But I flipped it over and I read the track listing. Qui-Gon's Noble End. Man. How many of people were spoiled by that? And then, because I didn't go to the midnight showing for Phantom Menace, I went to school that day. Nobody talked to me about it. They knew not to talk to me about it. Because I think there were 1 or 2 people who had seen it. And I went to, my mom was a secretary at an elementary school, at a primary school. And I went to her work to meet her there for us to then go to the cinema to go see Phantom Menace. And there was this little spoiled kid whose parents took them to the midnight showing. Ugh. And they run up to me and they know I love Star Wars because I was the Star Wars girl. They run up to me and they said, I saw Star Wars last night. And I said, don't tell me anything. It was amazing. Don't tell me anything. I haven't seen it yet. My favorite part was when the red guy got cut in half. Oh, the fact that that child lived is a miracle. So yeah, I knew Qui-Gon and I knew Darth Maul going into that movie. It's still, to this day, it's one of those things that just bugs me. But yeah, anyway, so Phantom Menace in the cinema over May the 4th weekend for the 25th anniversary. It was a lot of fun. I loved seeing it. It gave me a new appreciation for the movie, new insights into the characters and into the situation. And yeah, just a lot of fun. And I'm so glad. I hope they continue to release movies. We've got the 10th anniversary of Force Awakens coming up. That's insane. Can't believe that's 10 years. And Attack of the Clones, etc., etc. Yeah, so keep releasing those movies because we'll go see them. And apparently it made a lot of money in the box office. So that says a lot that people do want to go see these films in the cinemas. Oh, and before I wrap up, it made me feel so old. There were these people on Twitter, people who work for like Lucasfilm, people who have like real jobs, so they're like actual adults, saying, wow, this is the first time I've ever seen this movie in the cinema. I'm so excited. I'm like, how is that possible? These adults have never seen this movie. But, you know, I guess if they were born in 1999, they're 25 now. But that makes me feel old because I don't feel old enough to have a movie that a 25-year-old has never seen in the cinema that I saw when I was 16. That just, that's insane. But yay, Star Wars, right? Anyway, Phantom Menace was a lot of fun. So glad I got to see it. And it was a big part of my fandom experience in 1999. And a big part of pushing Star Wars back into the mainstream and back into popular culture again. And that, of course, had a big influence on my life as well. So to finish up this episode, I thought I would give you sort of an overview of my history with the Star Wars fandom. I find it so interesting talking to people, finding out how they became a Star Wars fan, when they became a Star Wars fan. I think the era in which somebody became a Star Wars fan has a huge influence on how they receive material and how they watch things. Depending on how old they were and what things were happening in the Star Wars fandom. at the time. And so I thought I would give you an overview. I'm hoping to do a deeper dive into some of these things further down the line. But yeah, just sort of the big rocks, the big moments, so you know where I'm coming from as a fan. And if I'm somebody that you want to continue to connect with and listen to talking about Star Wars down the line. Yeah, so I am 41, almost 42. So I was 11 months old when Return of the Jedi was released. So I really missed all of the original trilogy era of fandom. I was too young to see any of them in the cinema. I have some really, really fuzzy memories of the Ewok cartoon, but that went off air when I was like 3 or 4, so it wasn't a major part of my childhood. Star Wars wasn't a huge part of my childhood. I remember my dad watching them occasionally. I have some really fuzzy memories, early memories of like 3PO and R2 going through the Dune Sea and Darth Vader, but nothing really grabbed me, nothing held on to me. And ironically, for a period of time, I was sort of scared of Star Wars. When I was a kid, I got to go on Star Tours in Disneyland. It came out in 1987, Star Tours. Ironically, okay, this is a fun little thing. It almost has nothing to do with me, but it does. So when Star Tours opened in Disneyland, it was January 1987, and they kept the park open for 60 hours because in celebration of Star Tours, right? And we were there, my dad and my family, my mom and my dad and my sister and my aunt and uncle and my 2 cousins and my grandparents. We were there, and I have this really vivid memory of my dad and my uncle taking us back to the hotel and tucking us in and them being like, see ya, we're going back to the park. And me as like a 5-year-old being so angry I couldn't go with them, that they were going back to Disneyland and I had to go to bed. So even though I didn't ride it that weekend, I was at Disneyland the opening weekend of Star Tours. So that's sort of fun. But when I was tall enough and I went on the ride, it scared me to death. I hated it. And for years afterwards, anytime I saw anything that reminded me of Star Tours, I would hide or turn it off. I had the Disneyland sing-along VHS that came out, and they had like scenes from different rides, and one of them was a scene of Star Tours, and I'd always hide behind the couch. Yeah, I was terrified of Star Tours. Ironically, I was obsessed with Captain EO, the Michael Jackson 3D thing that George Lucas also had a big hand in, but I guess 3D creepy Angelica Houston wasn't as scary as Rex the robot crashing a spaceship. I don't know, but I was really scared of Star Wars for a long time. And then when I was about 12, we took a trip to Disneyland. Disney and Star Wars have always been connected for me. And so when people are like, oh, Disney, Star Wars, for me, it's always been interlinked from the beginning. Because we went to Disneyland and my dad took my sister on Star Tours because she was finally old enough to ride it. And she loved it, of course. And then we came back home. And a couple weekends after that, my mom was going out of town for the weekend. So my dad thought it was a great opportunity to show my sister what she had been riding on when they were on Star Tours. So he pulled out our bootlegged VHS copies of the original trilogy, and put them on for us. And we sat down, we watched A New Hope, and yeah, to this day, I cannot put my finger on what it was that just grabbed me. But this time, sitting down and watching the movies on that weekend, it was like something in my brain broke or was fixed. I don't know, but I was hooked. We watched A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back on the Saturday, and I was just blown away. I couldn't wait to get home from church on Sunday afternoon to finish and watch Return of the Jedi. And I'm so glad that I was able to experience the original trilogy somewhat unspoiled, which is harder and harder to do these days, because it's just general knowledge, a lot of these things. But I had nothing. I came in blind, and so Obi-Wan dying, and Yoda being Yoda, and of course the I am your father bit, Luke and Leia being brother and sister. All of those things were brand new, and I got to experience them fresh. And that was it. I loved it, and I spent the next several weekends, months, years watching movies over and over and over again. I think Empire Strikes Back was banned in the house for a short period of time because I just watched it too much. And then my uncle Glenn was a big Star Wars fan, and he got me into the EU, the now Legends books, the Thrawn books, and all of those. I read all of them. Anytime I could go get a new book, it was a Star Wars book. I'm one of the few people I know who really loved Courtship of Princess Leia, but I was a 16-year-old girl, or not 16. How old was I? I was a teenage girl. I was a teenage girl who loved Han and Leia, and there was a book about them getting married. So of course I was gonna love it. Plus, Rancor riding Dathomirian witches. I mean, what's better than that? I haven't actually been able to bring myself to read the new one, Princess and the Scoundrel, because I love Courtship of Leia so much. The only other person I know who loves it as much as me is my friend Tracy. I know most people are sort of like, oh, Courtship of Princess Leia. But anyway, so I read all the books. And of course, you got to remember, this was probably it was 1994 when I got in to Star Wars. There was no internet, or there was, but it wasn't common. We didn't get internet in our house until I think 96 or 97, and even then it was very different to the way it is now. There was no Wikipedia or Star Wars Explained, and so everything I was finding in publishing, I had a subscription to Star Wars Insider magazine, whatever I could find in used bookstores. I have this wealth, all this trivia knowledge in my head that to this day, sometimes I cannot figure out how I learned some of these things because, there was no internet. I read it or picked it up somewhere, but I was like this sponge, anything Star Wars. I just right inside. And it was all I could talk about, all I could think about. It was pretty intense. I wrote what now would be called fan fiction, my own Star Wars stories. But it was also a bit isolating. It was in a time period where Star Wars wasn't cool. It was sort of a nerdy, geeky thing. And then you added on top of that I was a girl. And I didn't know another girl Star Wars fan until I got to high school. And even the boy Star Wars fans, most of them were kids, younger than me, or they didn't want to talk Star Wars with a girl. So other than my dad and my uncles and a few other adult friends, I didn't have anybody to talk about all these things. So my poor family, my sister knows way more about Star Wars than she probably wants to, because just osmosis of me just talking about it. And I was known as the weird Star Wars girl for most of junior high. I went to a really small Christian school, and so it was pretty obvious what I was into, and I'm sure the fact that I wouldn't shut up about it and that's all I could talk about didn't help my case. But those few years of sort of being an isolated fan, I think it's an interesting time period to become a Star Wars fan, and it's I don't think there's a lot of people. It's a very small little group of us who would have had this experience, because much older than me, you would have been in the original release sort of era. Um, and then much younger than me, you were hitting Star Wars in the prequels, and the big hype and push when it came back into the cinemas, even with the special editions. And so it was a little tiny group of us that became Star Wars fans between the original release and the special editions. And I think it's a unique fan experience. I believe, I could be wrong, that Leslie Headland, who's the writer and executive producer, showrunner for The Acolyte coming up, that she is in this little weird subgroup of fans. She's only a couple years older than me, and I've heard her talking about writing fan fiction, pre-internet days, and her love of the publishing. And so I'm really, really excited to see Star Wars by somebody who has a similar fandom experience than me. These weird Zennials, who we're not quite Gen X and we're not quite millennials, and we sort of straddle both sides of the fence. And I feel like that in fandom as well, because I saw in my mind the original trilogy, the original release versions of the trilogy is what I have most ingrained in my head. And but I also got to ride the train. I was young enough that I rode the train hard for special editions and Phantom Menace, and I loved them, and I wasn't disappointed by them. So it's an interesting place to be a fan. And when the special editions came out, that was huge, because that was the first time I got to see the original trilogy in a cinema. And I remember sitting and seeing the Lucasfilm logo, and then A Long Time Ago, in A Galaxy Far, Far Away, and then the fanfare for A New Hope. And I just cried. I had goosebumps. And then that opening shot and that Star Destroyer that goes overhead and it just keeps going and going and going and going. And it's just amazing. So the special editions came out, and that really helped push Star Wars into more of a mainstream place. And then, of course, the hype and the media and the merchandise and everything for episode 1 came, and that pushed it and sort of catapulted it, I think, into this place where it hasn't really moved from popular culture too much in the last 25 years. There's a little bit of a lull, but not nearly what it was between Return of the Jedi and the special editions. And yeah, the hype and the merchandise and everything for episode 1. By then I was in high school, and I had some other friends who were into Star Wars, so that was really fun. Jesse and Sarah, and being able to talk about it with peers, that was really cool. And just, how huge episode 1 is. I don't think people who weren't there understand. Force Awakens was pretty big, but Phantom Menace, that was on another level of big. And that was amazing. But then after Phantom Menace came out, things quieted down a little bit. There was a good lull between Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. I was in high school. My interests, I started picking up other interests. I got really involved in theater, got into the X-Files. My Disney stuff became more trivia based. Learning about the parks and everything. And so Star Wars sort of started taking a back burner. And when, Attack of the Clones came out, I was out of high school. And by the time Revenge of the Sith came out, I was part of a full-time touring theater group. And so I was still excited and still went to midnight showings, all of that, but it wasn't my main fandom thing anymore. And I still loved it and never went away, but it wasn't the main focus. And it sort of stayed that way for a good long time. I missed the whole Clone Wars animation stuff. I was touring with a theater group and it was before online streaming. I didn't, of course, have access to Cartoon Network. I didn't really understand what it was either until my cousin's kids got into it and she started talking to me about it. And I was like, oh, that sounds sort of interesting. But it wasn't until 2015 that I saw any Clone Wars. And then I didn't sit down and watch the whole thing until COVID, until 2020. I sat down and did an entire watch in preparation for season 7 of the Clone Wars. So yeah, it sort of took a back seat for a little while. And then in 2013, I met my now husband, and that sort of brought Star Wars back a bit because he was a big Star Wars fan. It was something really connected with. One of the things that impressed me right away about him was that he was able to ramble off the original release date of A New Hope without thinking about it. I was like, ooh, this guy knows what he's talking about. And yeah, our love of Star Wars really sort of brought us together, and it was something, still is a big part of our life. We had Star Wars aspects in our wedding and everything. It was really fun. And then, of course, by then Disney had bought Star Wars, and there was, this rumors and then confirmation about a new trilogy coming. Things were building up. But it wasn't until 2015 that, Star Wars became a huge part of my life again. Of course, part of that was Force Awakens and the hype train of that, and I was riding that wave hard, really excited. But I also had some really, some of the difficult things happen in 2015. I'm not going to go into detail in this episode because it's a story that deserves to be told in its entirety. But I needed something. I needed something to help me through a really dark time. And yeah, Star Wars was there. It was something that was hopeful. It was consistent. And it was something I could escape into when I really needed something to escape, something safe to escape into. And I was spending a lot of time alone and in bed and at home. And I found this Star Wars cartoon called Star Wars Rebels. One season had already aired by the time I started watching it. And I was hooked, man. I love Star Wars Rebels. It was what I needed right then. And then, of course, we had Force Awakens. And there's all sorts of emotions mixed up with that. And that was it. I was back. And I got fully involved. And I started reading all the books. And, yeah, watching Rebels. Picking up what Clone Wars episodes I needed to give context into Rebels. Loved Rogue One. Everything. And it just, from there, it snowballed, of course. And we haven't really stopped getting content. And it's remained a central theme and thing in my life since 2015. Since 94, but since 2015, it's been huge. And I think having, the more characters I learned, or more stories I got to experience, I've drawn strength and, inspiration from so many of those stories. Ahsoka has become one of my favorite characters and has meant a lot to me, especially in the last several years. All the Rebel fam. All these characters, all these things mean so much. And now my kid, she's really into Young Jedi Adventures, and she has her own experiences with Star Wars, which are completely different. Although just this last week, she started getting into some of the original trilogy. It's not the way I intended. I had in my head this way I was going to sit down and show her these movies. And it's not happening that way, but it's her way. And it's amazing to see her own Star Wars fandom grow. I was never going to push it on her. It's obviously a big part of our life. And it's always around, but I was never going to make her love Star Wars. And the fact that she's finding her own way in is just amazing to see. And I think, whether it's the original trilogy, the prequels, Clone Wars, Young Jedi Adventures, or the books, whatever, there's these themes throughout Star Wars that connect. everything together wherever you are coming from in your fandom, and, you know, themes of hope, of finding your place in the galaxy, of working together. All those themes are the things that keep bringing me back to Star Wars and keep bringing old fans continue watching, bringing new fans in, and connecting everybody in this amazing fandom. And it's hope and the sense of going forward. And I can't wait to see what the next part of the adventure is going to be. What were the major influences in your own fandom journey? And what era of fan are you? I love to hear people's Star Wars stories, how they became fans, and what aspects of it really speak to their hearts. And I'd love to know if any part of my story you connected with. You can comment on the YouTube video if you're watching there, or connect with me on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, or Twitter at Loth-Cat Mewsings on all of them. In the next episode, I'm going to be talking about The Bad Batch now that that series is done, talk about the series as a whole, and my love for Star Wars animation. If you enjoyed listening to this podcast today, please like and subscribe and share it on your own social media channels. Thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to sharing more of my musings with you in the future.